page with that one? No sins forgiven without blood being shed. Adam and Eve disobeyed God. Tried to cover themselves with fig leaves. God says, why do you try to hide your nakedness from me? They admitted they sinned. He already knew. God shed blood to make a covering. A symbolic covering. It's the reason why we don't walk around naked now. That's the fact that I don't want all your wives to lust after this.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, the real reason is because I don't want to get sick anyway. The reason we cover up is because there's a sinfulness, a shamefulness in mankind now that was never there before the sin. There was no such thing as nude beaches. There was a nude garden, a beautiful place, and Adam and Eve's bodies were perfect. And there was no need for a covering because it was just the two of them, and had it grown into 1 billion people in the garden in a sinless state, there would be no need to cover up because everyone's body would be perfect and holy and flawless and sinless. But when mankind fell, the shedding of blood was required to cover up the sin. The shedding of the blood did more than just create clothes for them. It appeased the wrath of God upon them right then. So the example was set to give a blood offering. Cain knew the ground. He knew the fruits. He knew the vegetables. He knew what he grew. It was the best he had. And he gave it to God. And God responded how? Well, let's read on a little bit and see. Before we find out how he responded to Cain, we're going to see what happened with Abel. Because we just read in verse number 3 that, when the process of time came to pass, that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground offering to the Lord. Verse 4, and Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. But unto Cain and to his offering he had no respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. And the Lord said unto Cain, why art thou wroth? Why are you mad? Why are you angry? Why is thy countenance fallen? Why do you look that way? And if thou doest well, shall thou not be accepted? If thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. The best Cain had, God didn't accept. Because in reality it wasn't the best he had. It was what he knew, and he might have thought it was the best he could do, but it's not what God required. Because see, God is no respecter of persons. He doesn't treat you or you or you or you or you or you or me any differently. He treats us all the same, and he expects everyone to give him the same. He accepted the offering of Abel, which was a blood sacrifice. He rejected the offering of Cain, which was the best he thought he could do. It was all he'd ever known. To be sure, God would understand that it's all Cain had ever known. It was the best of what he had always lived for, what he had understood, what he could wrap his head around in his mind and his hands and his heart and his soul, and it's what he put everything of himself into, was that garden. It's the best that he knew, but it wasn't good enough for God. Why? Because God expects the same from everybody, regardless of what you've known in the past. Regardless of the life you've lived, regardless of the sins you've been, regardless of the games you ran with, or the liquor you drank, or the pot you smoked, or the acid you dropped, or the whores you ran around with, or anything else you did. Regardless of what your life was, he expects the same sacrifice from everybody. He don't treat... Oh. Can I stop here? I would like to stop here, but I don't want to go any farther. Okay. God says no. I've got to keep on going. He don't expect any more from the preacher. He expects from the member.
That's right.
He don't expect any more from me than he does the drunkard who just got saved. He expects the same thing. Well, preacher, we don't all know the same things unless we learn. Oh, that's right. We don't know unless we learn. Cain knew that. How do you know Cain knew? God had a conversation with him right after that. He said, you know. Don't you know if you do good, you're going to be rewarded if you do bad? God says, you knew, Cain, you knew. We talked about this before. We don't have a recording that they talked about it, but we know he knew. Because when God addresses Cain, he says, if thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? You know. If you give me what I want, I'm going to accept it. If you don't give me what I want, I'm going to reject it. You know that. We've had this conversation before. The saved person stands without excuse if the offering they give to God is not acceptable, because the offering He requires is laid out in black and white and red. He expects the same from you as He does from me. He expects the same from me as He does from Billy Graham. He expects the same thing from me as He did from Dwight Moody, from Charles Haddon Spurgeon. You ever watch Charles Stanley on the TV? Pastors a great big church in Georgia, I think it is. What a fantastic ministry. You know, God expects the same thing from me, expects from Charles Stanley, expects the same thing from you, expects from him. He doesn't hold us to a higher standard. He doesn't say it's okay for you guys to do whatever you want to do and just bring me the best you got. But so-and-so over here's got to bring me a little bit better than that because I require a little bit more from them. No. God requires the same from you as He requires from me. So why is there a double standard in the church? Why? Why is there a double standard in the way people view you? Why are some people held up here, and if they fall just a little bit, oh my, I can't believe that happened. I can't believe they did that. When there's those down here who have been saved just as long, been in church just as long, read their Bible just as much, who they're always down here and nobody questions why they're down here. When somebody who was up here falls a little bit, oh my goodness.
Amen.
No, I ain't quitting. Let me go this far, I'm going to finish. What offering do we bring to God? You know that when the time of the Old Testament church in the tabernacle, after the wilderness wanderings by the children of Israel, after the Jerusalem was established, after the nation of Israel came into being in their own land, in their own place, and the church age was established whereby the priest would go before the people every year and offer a blood sacrifice and a burnt offering to God, which was a picture of the ram that was caught in the thicket. The moment Abraham got the words out of his mouth to Isaac that God will provide Himself a lamb. God will provide Himself a sacrifice. God will provide Himself. Instantly he turned, there was a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. He went and got the ram, slew the ram, offered the burnt offering to the Lord. And every offering that was made by the children of Israel in the Old Testament era was made as a picture of two things. Number one, looking back to that ram caught in the thicket, which is the promised sacrifice of God. And number two, most importantly, looking ahead to the promised one of God, Jesus, the ultimate sacrifice. Remember the second verse we read today from Ephesians chapter 5, verse 2? Jesus gave Himself an offering. For who? We established that already. Shouldn't be any question right now. That He gave the best of what He had for us. And when the sacrifices were made in the temple earlier, before Jesus was born on this earth, before He came and He lived among us, before He experienced hate, before He experienced thirst, before He experienced hunger, body, every sacrifice that was made was a picture of what He was going to do on the cross. And then when He did it, when He sacrificed His body on the cross, the place where the blood used to be poured out on the mercy seat of God. And if you've never studied Jewish history, we need to have a lesson on that sometime. Because once a year when the high priest would go, he would sacrifice that lamb without spot, without blemish. And he would take that blood and he would walk into the holiest of all places where only one person a year was allowed to walk into. He would walk in there and he would sprinkle that blood around the mercy seat of God, where God Himself came down once a year and dwelled inside that holy place, so that priest could come and say, God, will You please forgive the sins of the people one more year? When Jesus died on the cross, He looked up into heaven and He said, it is finished. And the veil, a big, thick, giant curtain that separated the outside of the holy place of the temple from the innermost holy of holies, where that priest went in to sprinkle that blood every year, that veil ripped from the top to the bottom, exposing the mercy seat of God, exposing the place where God came down and met with man once a year, and the people got scared crazy because nobody was supposed to even see that place, let alone be in there. But God was making a statement. You don't need to shed blood anymore, because I shed the only blood that needed to be shed for the forgiveness of all the sins of all the world. I shed my own blood.
Amen. That's right.
So since we don't have to shed blood anymore, since we don't have to give rams and lambs and goats and stuff anymore, did the day to give offering end into? Did the time to offer up offerings cease at the death of Christ? Absolutely not. The time to give offerings has always been, since the day of Abraham, and always will be until the day we enter into our home in heaven. It's just changed what we're supposed to give. We don't give blood anymore. We're supposed to give us. Our whole self. Preacher, to me, an offering is just, when I write my check each week, when I throw that 20 or that 100 or whatever I put in the offering plate, if I've made $1,000 this week and I throw a $100 bill in the offering plate, that's my offering. If that's the offering you give God, stop. Just stop. Keep it yourself and have a vacation or something. Buy yourself a new car. Go get a perm, whatever. Go get a perm. If that's the offering you give God, if that's the way you view saying thank you to Him for everything He's done for you, then keep your stinking money. The offering we should give is the same thing He gave, because He never asks of anybody else anything that He hasn't already done.
That's right.
What offering are you giving Him? You see, I asked you earlier if everybody was on the same page that Jesus definitely died for you. And everybody was. And I was happy about that too, because I was going to take about 20 minutes to explain what that meant. But you know. So I don't have to do that. So you know Jesus died for you. So here's the second question. Knowing that you give an offering, and that offering is your life, what caliber of offering is it that you're giving Him with that life? Is it Cain's style of offering, which will most certainly be rejected? Or is it Abel's style of offering, which will be gladly accepted? Preacher, if I'm saved, then the offering I'm giving has got to be the good one, right? No, it has nothing to do with it. Those two things are completely separate.